Hello, and welcome to the Pythagorean channel, where we look through a logical lens at illogical things. So today we're going to talk about the mainstream media, and not what everyone else talks about with the mainstream media, their fake news or what it is that they put out in the world, or the things they leave out of their news stories. No, and we're also not really going to talk about how they're attacking content creators on YouTube. We're all pretty well aware of a lot of the issues surrounding that. They're the ones who pointed out / caused a lot of large corporations to pull their advertising from YouTube in total. And that's a little evil. But again, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today I want to talk about fixing the mainstream media. And I'm going to be upfront with you and say I don't have the answer for this. This is a conundrum that I've been trying to wrap my head around for the past 5 or 6 years at this point. I just can't see a way to make it uncorruptible and have the news actually put out news instead of tilted stories left, right. It doesn't matter. I would much rather all of the information be included and let me as the viewer decide which side to fall on instead of being pushed in one direction or another. And again, it's something that I've thought about a lot, and the options that I can think of all have massive loopholes and massive security holes and massive everything holes, right? American media, right? I'm not going to speak for the rest of the world's media. I don't live in these places, so I'm not exposed to their news or politics constantly, right? So I can really only speak about American news sources. But I can use what I've heard and what I've been told and what I've read from other places in the world about their news sources. And we'll touch on that a bit later. So let's just kind of start with where I believe the problem lies with the American media right now. And I believe the biggest problem with American media right now is that it is news for profit. Almost everything they put out is there to elicit a reaction from people, right? So it's not to deliver the news, it's to deliver something that makes them want to watch more news, right? And makes them want to find out what's going on. And you can really see this by how quickly the media jumps onto things that are actually fake news. And there are lots and lots of examples of this in the past. I'm sure there will be lots of examples of this in the future. But the whole thing of doing it for profit is, I think, where this is going horribly, horribly wrong. Right? News should not be a profitable thing. It just should not be a profitable thing. News should be an information delivery service and nothing more. Some examples of of publishing news to elicit reactions from people. Actually, I think the best example of all time, at least currently, is probably the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman issue. If the mainstream media had realized that George Zimmerman was of ethnic descent, in this case Hispanic, this news story would have never gotten out the way it did. This news story only got put out the way it did because people were ready, or people are waiting and wanting to hear these sorts of racial things. And it sounds weird to say that people want to hear it, but it's obvious people want to hear it because they get up in arms about it. And because of this reaction, people tune into more news, and the news ratings go up. And if the news ratings go up, their ad revenues go up. And if their ad revenues go up, they make more profits. And more profits means more money, of course, right? That's why businesses get into business. So with that in mind, right, and we all know that whole case was blown entirely out of proportion. And you turn around and, you almost never hear about the largest crimes against people of different ethnicities, because the vast majority of violence against black people is committed by black people. But you don't hear that in the mainstream media because that does not pull on the heartstrings of the guilty white folks. Moving on from this. So how do we cure this? How do we make news not for profit? Well, we can force news agencies to become actual not-for-profit agencies, but that's still going to leave them highly susceptible to reporting news on a specific slant, because at that point the news agencies will be reliant on donations, for the lack of a better term, from different groups and different people. And of course, they are going to slant their news in the direction of the people who are their main sources of funding. And it's going to lead to less fair and less balanced news. Okay, so what about government funded? All I'll do is point at the BBC. That is probably the largest government funded news channel, largest government funded television piece in the world, to the point to where, if I have my facts straight, if you own a TV in Great Britain, you pay a tax that basically is just for the BBC. I don't remember the name of the tax. I'm not too worried about looking it up. You guys can go do that yourselves. You're smart people who can figure out how to click on Google and say search for X. And from things I've read and things I've seen over the years, especially if you follow guys like Sargon of Akkad, there are videos where he even says things like, the BBC flip-flops based on who's in power. Who the prime minister is and what group is in power, and they report news on that slant. And of course, they do that out of fear of losing funding, right? I mean, if you were constantly afraid of losing your funding, wouldn't you want to appease those who are giving you your method of payment, your paychecks? Of course you would. I would too. Who wouldn't? So that obviously is out, and it's become blaringly obvious that having them self-support through ad revenue is also not the way to go. And as I said, I really don't have the answer to this question. This one is a tough question. It's a tough thing to think about. How do you think about this? I don't have the answer. And it's something that I've thought about for a long time, and everything I come up with is entirely corruptible. And it scares me, to be frank with you. There's no single news source that one can trust, and anymore I find myself spending more and more time just looking at a whole bunch of different news sites and a whole bunch of different news sources, trying to build the whole picture. So I find myself going to leftist websites. I find myself going to right websites. I find myself going to in-between websites. I find myself going to authoritarian websites. I find myself going to libertarian websites. I find myself going to all of these different places just to try and piece together the whole piece of news that's in front of me. To be honest with you, it's becoming alarmingly time-consuming. But I think the worst part, the absolute worst part of all of this, truly comes down to most people have one or two sources for news. And that's all they listen to. That's all they care about. They watch their news, their nightly news on their local television station, or they hit CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or any of these other various news stations and news sources. And that is their sole source of news, maybe coupled with a local newspaper. And so they only get this slanted view on the world, and it becomes, how do you fix that? And it almost feels like a downward spiral, where once you start, you can't stop, and it just keeps getting faster and faster, and it keeps getting worse and worse and worse, and it just never seems to end. And as I'm saying this, as I'm sitting here saying this, I'm finding myself becoming frustrated, because I don't like not being able to come up with the answers to something. Even if it's the wrong answer, I'm happy to have an answer that at least I can rest myself on until I can do more research and maybe find the better answer. Where this seems to be going right now is it seems to be pointing towards a definite authoritarian stance on the world, and severely limiting the information that is available to people. So I guess my question to you, the viewers, is what other options are to fix this. I can't think of any other options to make the news more news-like instead of, CNN, which during the elections became known as the Clinton News Network because that's pretty much what they were. And post the election, they've become the anti-Trump News Network. And I'm not saying that I'm pro or anti-Trump. I'm certainly much happier that he's in office than Hillary. Certainly much happier that he's in office than Hillary. But, we're talking about what was once probably one of the most, if not the most respected news source possibly in the world, definitely in the United States for a very, very long time. And now we've come to this point, we've come to this junction, if you will, where it's not that anymore. They've literally sullied their name to the point to where, as far as I'm concerned, they're one of the most untrustworthy news sources there is out there. I am more likely to believe something on Alex Jones's website than I am from something from CNN. And that's pretty bad, right? And don't get me wrong. I have nothing against Alex Jones, right? I think he's very entertaining. I think a lot of the news that shows up on his website, I'm not going to step out and call it fake news. A lot of it has a kernel of truth in it from which a tinfoil tree grows, right? And I'm not one to shy away from tinfoil things because sometimes they're quite entertaining. But that doesn't mean that they're not true, or at least not based in some kernel of truth, which I think is the important part of it. Right, and it's when dealing with the stuff from like Alex Jones as a news source, you definitely have to run around and you definitely have to cut out the fluff, if you will, right? You have to get to the kernel that's there of truth, and I think that his side does help to make a full picture of a news source, right? If you can find corroborating stories on different websites, right? So you have a leftist view of a story, you have the rightist view of a story. It's even better if you can get an authoritarian view of the story and a libertarian view of the story. If you can pull all of those sources together, you can actually build this very clear picture of what's actually happening. And you can say, okay, now I have all of the pieces that everybody else wanted to leave out of their stories, and I've got them all in one place. Now I can see this entire picture, and all of a sudden I'm actually more scared than I was when I was just viewing it on Alex Jones's piece, because he misses some of the points as well. I'm going to ask one more time to the viewers, what would your solution be? Because obviously self-supporting ads don't work. Government support's not going to work. Nonprofit's not going to work. So how do we keep the media from spinning something so crazily, right? How do we keep them honest? How do we fix the mainstream media so that it can become a reliable news source again? I don't know. I don't have an answer. And I know this is a horrible premise for a video for me to come on here and say I don't have the answer, but you know what? I don't have the answer. And I'm hoping that maybe someone smarter than me sees this video and can come up with an answer. Come up with an answer that can't instantly have holes poked in it and become a leaking sieve of spin. Yeah. All right, well, thank you guys for your time, and I hope you all have a good one. We'll see you next week.